Now, I've already talked a little bit about 8 skill and 10 skill classes in regards to hardware in previous videos. Now it's time to talk about the software behind them. The driver skill brackets, as it were, in the US for big 8 skill racing: Sportsman, Intermediate, and Pro. Now, I was going to go more into an opinion piece as to why I think the system is kinda goofy, but that would just turn into another rant video. Instead, I'm going to give you an idea of where you should sign up when going to a big race like a race time event or a smaller event like a club race or trophy race. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the sponsors for this channel: A-Made Hobbies, RC Trophy Chasers, Cow RC, Leadfinger Racing, and newly added to the roster, Peach State Hobbies. Anything you guys purchase using the links in the description below will directly support me as well. Let's begin. Let's begin with the 3 main classes you'll be faced with in most scenarios at most large race events: Pro, Intermediate, and Sportsman. So let's start with Sportsman. I'm going to be honest with you. If you've never really been to a big race or consider yourself a novice to beginner level driver, there's no question that you should go into Sportsman to see where you stand. Because Sportsman is almost always the largest class at any given event, and because you don't really have to worry about career drivers running you down, it will be a prime time to work on your racecraft with similarly skilled drivers. At a large race where everyone is looking to do well and tend to drive very hard, the one who keeps their wheels on the ground the longest tends to win at most events. Of course, speed is important. You can't really roll every single jump and expect a TQ, but keeping a consistent pace and not crashing will usually lend you a decent standing and placement. I think now is a good time to talk a little bit about racer etiquette. When people are racing wheel to wheel, unlike in full-size cars where fear of death keeps people from racing too insane, RC racers don't really have a self-preservation instincts to avoid crashes. Racing close to other drivers on the track is an acquired skill in RC, one that most beginners don't really have. As such, when it comes to running in Sportsman, it's important to remember that most drivers are still learning car control, and as such shouldn't really be lambasted for crashing most of the time, even if it isn't to you. Racing incidents happen, and on what's often a demanding and difficult track, these racing incidents can happen a lot in Sportsman. Overall, if you're a newer driver and want to just go to one of these events for the experience, and you want to develop your driving skills with similarly skilled drivers, Sportsman should be a good start. Once you begin to show pace to podium in Sportsman, or have done so a few times, then it's time to move up to the middle of the range, Intermediate. Now, Intermediate is a bit of a weird one as the skill ranges wildly at big races around the country. A driver like Aiden Ridgway might be an intermediate driver at Wicked Weekend or Silver State, but is a pro-level driver at small regional races like Peach State Classic. You'll also have drivers like me in Intermediate, which usually ends poorly. Intermediate, like I said before, is for people who either want to prove something to themselves or others, or it's for drivers who would be considered more seasoned and experienced. Some people would say that Intermediate should be the largest class at most race events here in the US, but that's a topic for another person on another day. One would also think that the Intermediate class would race cleaner than Sportsman, but unfortunately that isn't really the case all the time. Sometimes you'll get someone who is more sportsmanship and races cleanly and safely. Other times you'll get someone who punts you if you get in the racing line for even a second. Most of the time though, you'll get something in between. I will say though that intermediate drivers, due to their increased experience and oftentimes better car control, will usually race cleaner from a pure body contact and crash perspective. If you're at a point where you're on the podium or even winning in the Sportsman class, but don't have the pace to even think about running pro, then Intermediate is where you should sign yourself up. Now, if you're actively running pro at large race events, well, first off, you're probably not watching this far, but if you are, then you're at a point where you're not only comfortable running with the best in the country, but you're able to actually compete at that level. What pro actually means depends on the race you're going to and which region you're in. Pro at a race like Wicked Weekend or DNC isn't going to mean the same thing as a race like Peach State or perhaps the Exalt race down in Florida. The actual name of that one eludes me. This is also where a lot of faster intermediate drivers move up when they really want to prove something. Since you'll be running against the biggest names in the sport, you'll have plenty of opportunities to do that. You'll also be racing against the same group of fastest drivers in the country and even world at different races. Also, at this level you start to run into people racing for actual money. Not necessarily from the race itself most of the time, but from contingency money from the driver's respective sponsors. As such, you'll see drivers at this level taking things much more seriously, due to their literal livelihoods being on the line. Very few drivers out there have what it takes to be successful in the pro class at most races, and even fewer will actually receive some kind of employment from these racing companies. Now, most are lucky to even get travel money. If you really want to make a name for yourself in RC, and you're willing to put in the work into consistent practice and tuning, and you have the natural talent to do so, the Pro class is for you. Now, what about 10th scale? Well, things are sort of different. You see, the 10th scale classes in the US at least can be categorized into two sections, mod and stock. First, let's go over the stock class. Stock classes used to be for beginners who didn't want to spend dummy amounts of money to actually race in the first place. I'm sure you know if you made it this far in the video, things are very different these days, but we'll get to that later. For now, let's focus on what the rules of stock actually are. The only real rule that we need to worry about right now is the motor turn rule. Different cars in different classes have different limits to how much power the motor can have. It's also important to know that the lower the turn rating on the motor, the more power it has in 10th scale racing. The most common limit you're going to see for the buggy classes will be 17.5 for two-wheel drive buggy and 13.5 for four-wheel drive buggy. Only motors that are approved by ROAR are allowed, and your battery must be under 8.4 volts when it runs through tech inspection. There are some deviations depending on where you race. I know that's in some places, particularly carpet tracks, where 21.5 motor limits for two-wheel drive and 17.5 for four-wheel drive is popular, and I have a theory on why that is, but once again, I'll get to that later. Other than that, and the general rules regarding the dimensions of the buggy and such, there are no limits to what you can do to your buggy. This has sort of led to the stock class becoming more of a wallet dumping mess. Looking at a lot of top drivers' cars, you'll see hundreds of dollars worth of titanium and lightweight parts adorning them. I already made a video about how these things aren't really necessary for most people to do well at a local level, but for a lot of people it can feel downright depressing looking at the prices of some of these parts, especially when these upgrades are marketed as necessary to win. Many racers in the 10th scale space have advocated for stock to become an OEM type class where you're only allowed to run what came in the box, along with certified OEM upgrades meant for durability like hubs and spindles, and to be honest, I'm not really opposed to that at all. Where I think the stock has a place though is on carpet. To explain my point, we need to move into uncharted territory, on-road racing. Now, on-road has sort of run into a barrier in terms of mod power plants. On a larger track, it's not uncommon for cars to reach upwards of 75 miles an hour down a straight. At this point, very few people are able to react fast enough to hang on to their cars at that speed, and even few are able to consistently run at those speeds. This is why at most on-road races these days, usually on indoor carpet tracks or club races, motor limits are enforced for pretty much all classes except for touring cars. I think a similar situation is evolving in carpet indoor races for off-road as well, where mod cars are getting so fast on carpet that many people simply can't keep up. This is also where the consequences of actually crashing a mod car into a barrier or wall will almost certainly break something, since the cars are moving so fast. I think limiting the turn rating for different classes is a good idea for carpet for these reasons. Dirt, clay, and astroturf are a little different as these surfaces tend to be a little bit easier on things like the drivetrain and overall car from crashes. It's also important to note that due to the limited torque of a stock motor, tires also tend to last a lot longer on all surfaces. Also, it's important to note that in stock racing, proper gearing, good maintenance, and good driving will make you 90% competitive in pretty much all scenarios. If you spend $80 on a ceramic bearing kit to shave off a quarter of a second but still crash, costing you 3 seconds, in the end, you've still lost 2.75 seconds. Like I said in the few videos now, these upgrades will make your car faster, not you. Moving on to mod in 10th scale racing, there are even fewer rules regarding what you can do to your buggy, especially in the electronic department. So long as your battery is approved by ROAR and your car fits in the dimensions of particular class you're running, you can do whatever you want to your buggy or truck. One would think that this would become even more of a wallet dumping class than stock, but this isn't really the case. Unlike stock, where running things like running ceramic bearings, titanium screws and turnbuckles, and $140 plus hand-picked motors are necessary if you want more back-end horsepower and torque, all you need to do if you want more power from your car is either turn the timing up on your ESC, or run a more powerful motor. When I still ran two-wheel drive and four-wheel drive buggy, I ran an 8.5 turn in my two-wheel drive and a 6.5 turn in my four-wheel drive. To be honest, very rarely did I ever run them above 75% throttle, even on a large indoor track like the one you see here. If you're starting out and don't really feel comfortable running a full power mod motor, it's not too hard to just turn down the throttle on your remote if need be. This leads me to the next point about mod, and that is even though your internals and tires are under more strain than if you were to run in stock, your electronics, depending on how you run them, are under a lot less stress. Since you're not trying to extract every ounce of power from a motor like in 17.5 or 21.5 buggy classes, your motor, ESC, and battery aren't a whole lot of load and thus will last a lot longer. You don't have to buy big batteries in order to run an entire heat without fade either. You can run a 4000 mAh battery perfectly fine for an 8-minute run for two-wheel drive uses if you're careful. Now, there are a few downsides to running mod. Chief among them is the initial cost. If you only plan on running stock, you can get away with running a stock ESC, which is anywhere from $60 for the latest for Blinky class ESCs and $120 for higher end Blinky class ESCs. For an ESC that can handle more powerful mod motor, and by that I mean anything under 10.5 turns, you'll be spending upwards of $200 for a good ESC from a reputable brand. There's also the cost of maintenance on mod cars compared to stock ones. Like I said before, since stock cars are under less mechanical strain compared to mod cars, they go through wear parts a bit quicker. Things like bearings and mainly tires will go bad thanks to the higher torque, so if you're running mod, you better be on top of your maintenance. If I had to choose which class between stock and mod for most drivers on dirt, or AstroTurf, I'd go with mod for a few reasons. For one, like I said before, you don't need to spend a whole lot of money on hop-ups and upgraded electronics to be 100% competitive. All you really need to do is learn throttle control, car control, and setup, which is admittedly easier said than done. Thing is though, this sort of removes any racing excuses you may bring up at a track. There will be no complaint that X driver is running Y motor that nobody can buy. If you lose in mod, it's not because the other person was running better equipment than you. It was because your racecraft wasn't as good as the people in front of you, which is kind of freeing if you think about it. It also helps that a lot of big 10-skill races have started to allow for independent mod classes. That means no chassis sponsorships. These classes usually are a lot more relaxed and friendly than the highly competitive pro mod and stock classes. So if you're going to run a class in 10th scale, those are the ones I'd go for. Now, this topic could go on for a long time, in which it usually ends in some sort of rant or argument, so I'm going to finish up here. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel as well. Also, if you'd like to support me financially, you can subscribe to my Patreon. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my active patrons Michael Williams, RC World Discord server, Casey Nix, Ben Reeves, Dave Armstrong, Rob Bedingfield, Caden Merks, Ian Petrie, Buddy Howell, Jeffrey Coons, James D. Anderson, Shane T. Ruth, Morrison Wad, and a new patron, Maxim RC Hobbies. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.